Hello and welcome to the Bonsai Garden. Today I'd like to talk about Japanese maples as bonsai. This particular tree is a Deshojo Japanese maple that I bought from Greenwood Bonsai. It's got a very twisty trunk to it, almost a corkscrew, and some people might suggest that's not very natural, but I disagree with that. Near where I live in the grounds of the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, there is a tree, not dissimilar in shape to this, which grows next to a pond. This is a tree which I bought, but what I'd really like to talk to you about is the trees that I've developed myself. I really love Japanese maples. They're very beautiful, elegant and showy trees, and I've got several around my garden as garden trees in containers or planted in the ground. We've got a couple of group plantings here. This first one is an Orange Dream, which is it's currently 4 trees. There was a 5th tree in there, but unfortunately it's died, and so I will be looking to replace that in spring. And this was just a collection of trees which I bought for £3 each from the local supermarket. Just behind that here we've got a collection of 11 Atropurpurea red maples, and again this was a collection of trees which I bought for £3 each from the local garden centre and planted up into a forest planting. What's particularly unusual about this one is it just sort of naturally develops sort of strata through there. So although it hasn't developed an awful lot of ramification in the 3 years that it's been in the pot, it does have this sort of natural sort of layers to it as it develops through the season. This is my butterfly Japanese maple forest planting. It's planted to be reminiscent of a grove of trees growing on top of a hill. And again, this was a collection of 6 trees which cost me £3 each from the local garden centre. And it's now planted into a ceramic pot, which is 40 centimetres wide. You can see that it's taken on this lovely pink colour in the foliage. Now, butterfly maples tend to be a sort of insipid colour. There is some debate and argument on Facebook as to the point of creating these forest plantings, and the argument is basically that they look like sticks in pots. I guess it's a matter of taste. Certainly they don't necessarily look like forests, so I think maybe that label itself is a little bit misleading. But I think that they can look quite pretty. In terms of maintenance, all I've tended to do with this is just cut out the growing tips to try and encourage a bit more ramification in the trees, and certainly it's been more welcoming of that than the Atropurpurea. And you can see that it's getting quite twiggy and dense in the upper canopy. Here is a Kabadachi, or clump style, which I put together early last year. I moved it into this shallower pot this year from a basket, and it hasn't fared very well. So I'm likely to retry this experiment again in spring. And I've got a collection of young green maples this time, which I'm going to retry. This particular tree is a katsura Japanese maple that I bought from the local DIY store, B&Q, for about £8, and it's been in my care now for about 3 years. Initially I planted it into a basket to give the roots plenty of aeration, and it was in that basket for about 2 years, and just at the beginning of this season I planted it into this ceramic pot. It's taken on quite a pleasing shape, and the nabari, or the roots, are also looking surprisingly mature. And you can see here, this was one of the benefits of putting it into the basket. The basket was quite shallow, but it encouraged the root growth. When I first bought it, it had two very distinct branches, which didn't look quite right with me. So what I did was I trimmed back the growth on one of those thick branches quite heavily and let the other grow. The one that grew heavily became the apex of the tree, which you can see going up here. And the other one, I eventually let branches start growing from that, and it's down this way. And by trimming back where I didn't want it to grow and leaving the bit that I did want to grow to extend out, I was able to control and shape the tree. Some of the shoots are extending out now, and it just needs a little bit of a trim before we go into autumn proper. And once we're in winter and it drops its leaves, I'll be able to have a proper look at the structure and decide what I need to trim and what I can keep. Certainly for a tree which I've only had for perhaps 3 years and which started out as nursery material, I'm really quite pleased with how this is looking. I'm just simply trimming back some of these longer shoots, just to try and regain some of the shape and the profile of the tree. Once the leaves have dropped in autumn, I will be able to properly reassess the tree. So at the moment I'm just trying to regain the triangular shape. The tree can just go back onto the benches. At the other end of the scale from the developed trees, here are seedlings which I planted up in November of last year. I just put the seeds into a shallow tray here, into a sort of sandy, gritty mix, and just left those to develop over winter. The cold weather performed the natural stratification on those seeds, so they repeated freezing and thawing, cracked the seeds open and worked the seeds up. And you can see here that quite a number of them have developed, and they've got quite attractive colours to them. Those just now need to be left to develop. When I talk about growing maples in baskets, this is what I mean. These came from the local hardware store, and you can see that they've got aeration holes, perforations all down the side, which means that the soil in there and the roots of the tree are very well aerated. Maples don't like to be sat in damp, wet soil. And I find that these baskets are very good for encouraging the roots. In fact, what I expect is that when I come to take this out of the basket, there will be a big rectangular mass of roots. This particular tree is a Sango Kaku, which is the coral bark variety of maple. So the bark develops a sort of pink coloration to it. And this particular tree went into this basket in April of this year, and will likely be staying in there to try and develop the nabari and the root spread at the base of the tree. It could well be in there for another year or two. Just behind that on my benches, I've got a little princess Japanese maple, which is doing exactly the same. It's just really in there to try and develop the roots initially. And again, will likely be in there for another year or two before I do anything with it. What's particularly nice about the little princess Japanese maple is that it has really small leaves, which makes it very suited to bonsai. I'll be interested to see what I can do with that going forward. This is an Anne Irene, which I got from the garden centre in March of this year. Again, it's planted into this basket to help encourage the roots, and will likely be in there for perhaps the next 2 years. I widened the branches to try and separate them a little bit. It may well be time to remove that wire shortly. Down here is the Discouragio maple that I accidentally decapitated, and therefore I'm trying to ground layer in this deep pot. I'm trying to get it to put out roots further up the trunk than they were. There's quite a long straight area of trunk which was a bit useless, and in order to just develop and fatten up the tree and help develop the roots, you can see I'm just letting this extend out and out and out, and that will help grow the tree and hopefully rescue what was a bit of a disaster. This rather messy corner of my garden is actually where I ground grow tree, and just in the bottom there is actually a Discouragio maple. It's getting a little bit shaded out by the silver birch behind it, so I might need to trim that back. But I'm essentially trying to fatten up that tree in the ground. It's been in there now for about a year and a half, and I'll probably leave that in there again for another 2 years perhaps before I make an assessment and decide what I need to do with it. This is an Anne Irene Japanese maple which is bought this year, and I just popped it into this pond basket to encourage the roots. These pond baskets give great aeration and they're great for developing young plants. And you can see that this one, the roots have actually grown out of the bottom of the pot into this larger pot. That's not necessarily a problem, and I will be leaving that there just to develop for a couple of years. One of the things about Atropurpurea is they can tend to have quite large leaves. This is actually a garden plant in a big pot rather than a bonsai, but you can see the size of the leaf there. So that was a look at the Japanese maples developing in my garden into bonsai. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.